Good morning from the Freedom of Information and Privacy Association. I'm Patrick Farnsworth, and this is your Access and Privacy Online News Summary for Saturday, February 28th. It's a busy week with big stories and late-breaking developments for Bill C-4, Part 4. Artificial intelligence companies are sitting at the center of a devastating human tragedy in Tumbler Ridge, raising questions about what happens when private companies flag violent threats but face no clear legal duty to act. At the same time, political parties are being pitched AI-powered digital fighters to weaponize voter data in real time, even as Parliament and Senate continue debating legislation that would shield parties from independent privacy oversight. Remaining in BC, the provincial government has introduced Bill 9, promising efficiency in the FOI system, while critics warn it weakens access rights and ignores long-standing record-keeping failures. And in the United States, court battles over press freedom, immigrant enforcement secrecy, and mass document disclosures continue to test the boundaries of constitutional protections. It's a week where surveillance, accountability, and democratic safeguards are colliding. Let's dive in. Let's start at the federal level, where Canada's Chamber of Sober Second Thought is suggesting amendments to multiple pieces of legislation. Senators are pushing back on controversial provisions in two bills, with similar calls for the House of Commons to act. We've heard from our partners at ICLMG with links in the show notes on the issues in Bill C-12, the government's border legislation. A Senate committee is recommending removing or significantly amending immigration sections that would expand information sharing and allow Cabinet to cancel immigration documents in the public interest. The bill would give the government the power to share the personal information of migrants, permanent residents, and naturalized citizens with other federal departments, provinces, territories, and foreign governments. Senators called for stronger parliamentary oversight and privacy commissioner review, and include a sunset clause to require a parliamentary review. The National Security Committee said the committee heard from witnesses who warned the legislation could violate human rights and lacks procedural fairness. Now, as Bill C-12 advances, Bill C-4 has completed third reading in the Senate, with a message sent to the House of Commons. Senator Pierre J. Delphont put forward a detailed motion to amend Part 4 to include a sunset clause. His motion was passed by the Senate, and the bill now goes back to the House of Commons for them to reject or accept the amendments. For an example of why privacy and personal information is a critical consideration in these debates, reporting from Canada's National Observer reveals that Canadian political parties are being pitched AI-driven so-called digital fighter tools, apps that mobilize supporters to post AI-generated messaging across social media in real time. The system relies on voters uploading contact lists and amplifying centrally generated narratives, with no requirement to disclose that the messaging originated from a coordinated AI platform. The app goes through social media to find negative posts about the politician and then creates a counter-narrative in real time. The CEO of Logitech, the creator of the app, said there is no ethical issue with the app, claiming it all falls on the politician. All of this unfolds as Bill C-4 would further entrench political party immunity from privacy laws, cementing weaker oversight for parties than applies to businesses or Canada's spy agency. We've included links in our show notes to Senator Delphont's speech and Senator Deacon's comments on the sunset clause, and want to recognize and thank all the senators who work to address the privacy concerns of Canadians. We will continue following both bills closely in the days and weeks ahead. Now to FIBA's backyard in British Columbia. The provincial government has introduced Bill 9, the Freedom of Information and Protection of Privacy Amendment Act, 2026. The government says the changes will streamline FOI processing, reduce duplication, and support a new centralized digital service model. The Information and Privacy Commissioner welcomed operational improvements and enhanced collaboration powers for his office. On review here, we have serious concerns. Bill 9 replaces the duty to respond, quote, without delay, end quote, with, quote, without unreasonable delay, end quote, adding a legal reasonableness test. It expands grounds to disregard requests as abusive. It grants heads of public bodies greater discretion in deciding whether a request contains enough detail. and it extends ministerial authority over centralized data sharing through so-called connected services. Based on FIPA access assessments, delays are more likely to stem from systemic record-keeping failures, not from overly broad public requests, as government has never publicly demonstrated full implementation of the Information Management Act. The 2022 Special Legislative Committee issued 34 recommendations to modernize access law. Bill 9 does not implement many core principles, including a statutory duty to document and extending FOI coverage to the administrative functions of the Legislative Assembly. This is an evolving situation, and FIPA will be closely engaged as Bill 9 moves forward. And now on to the rest of the news. We begin in British Columbia, where the tragic mass shooting in Tumbler Ridge is forcing a national reckoning about AI governance. 8 months before the attack, OpenAI's internal systems flagged the shooter's ChatGPT account for violent ideation involving gun scenarios. Roughly a dozen employees were aware. Some reportedly considered contacting police. Instead, the company banned the account, but did not alert authorities, determining the situation did not meet its internal threshold. On February 10th, 8 people were killed before the shooter died by suicide. The deeper issue is not a single corporate decision. It's that Canada has no binding AI legislation, setting out when companies must escalate credible threats. The proposed AI Intelligence and Data Act died on the order paper in 2025. What remains is a voluntary code with no enforcement teeth and potential overreach with surveillance. Even though currently the Personal Information Protection and Electronic Documents Act does have an emergency exception, it was drafted for clearer crises, not the probabilistic threat indicators AI chatbots cause. Jean-Christophe Billy-Papon, an ethics professor at Simon Fraser University, said there must be an independent digital safety agency to act as a third party. He also says that AI companies should refer to trained threat assessment professionals when they identify concerning interactions. Complicating the debate south of the border, courts are wrestling with a different kind of digital surveillance: reverse keyword warrants. In Pennsylvania and Colorado, police have obtained warrants compelling Google to reveal the identities of anyone who searched specific terms, such as a victim's address, within a set time window. In one case, the tactic helped identify a serial rapist. In others, courts have questioned whether sweeping up innocent searchers violates constitutional protections. While some judges claim police had probable cause to look at who searched up the victim's address before the attack, a dissenting judge said probable cause requires more than a hunch and guessing that a perpetrator would have used Google. Privacy advocates warn these warrants turn everyone's search history into potential evidence. U.S. courts remain split, with the U.S. Supreme Court expected to weigh in soon on related digital surveillance questions. Google says its processes for handling law enforcement requests are designed to protect users' privacy while meeting its legal obligations, and the corporation says it reviews all legal demands for legal validity. Google warns users' personal information can be shared outside the company when it has a, quote, good faith belief that disclosure of the information is reasonably necessary, end quote, to respond to applicable laws, regulations, legal processes, or an, quote, enforceable government request, end quote. And on another front, the Pentagon is pressing AI company Anthropic to remove ethical restrictions from its systems for military use, including limitations on autonomous targeting and domestic surveillance. CEO Dario Amodei has been clear about his concerns over governments having unchecked use of AI, including fully autonomous armed drones and AI-assisted mass surveillance. Defense officials have warned they would claim Anthropic is a supply chain risk or use the Defense Production Act to use Anthropic's technology as the military sees fit, even without approval, on how they're used. The debate underscores a growing tension. Who decides how powerful AI systems are deployed? Governments, corporations, or independent regulators? Across these stories, one pattern is clear. AI is outpacing law and creating real human impact. Now to stories driven by access requests and transparency battles across the country. In Ottawa, the federal government accepted conservative amendments to its omnibus budget bill, C-15, placing guardrails on proposed regulatory sandbox powers that would have allowed cabinet to temporarily override certain laws. Amendments now clarify that statutes such as the Access to Information Act cannot be bypassed. The amendments, backed by liberal members of the committee, also include a requirement for ministers to consult with Canadians before ordering any legal exemptions, and to report back to Parliament. The bill says a minister may order an exemption only if they think it would allow for the testing of a product, service, process, procedure, or regulatory measure, quote, with the aim of facilitating the design, modification, or administration of a regulatory regime to encourage innovation, competitiveness, or economic growth, end quote. Meanwhile, in Ottawa, Anushka Yadav, LJ reporter at The Pointer, highlights 5 Caledon residents have been honored for using FOI requests, research, and sustained civic advocacy to challenge a proposed mega quarry development, underscoring how access laws remain a critical tool for environmental accountability and civic society. Among their accomplishments, they pushed for clarity on groundwater protections, calling for binding conditions, not just contingencies and protocols, to ensure nearby wells and recharge areas are safeguarded. And in New Brunswick, Natalie Sturgeon, LGI reporter at the St. Croix Courier, tells us the province has rejected a recommendation to make municipal training mandatory, even as several newly amalgamated municipalities face governance breakdowns and closed-door meeting controversies involving the Local Governance Act and Right to Information rules. According to a letter, instead of making training mandatory, the department plans to address the barriers which may have prevented elected officials from engaging with the training offered in partnership with the municipal associations. In the months following the recommendation, the Commission also released an advisory warning that Code of Conduct and Conflict of Interest meetings could not be held in closed session. Across jurisdictions, transparency often depends less on statute and more on civil persistence. There has been a lot of activity in the orders and courts this past week. In British Columbia, the Privacy Commissioner found that 35 health workers improperly accessed medical records of victims of the Vancouver Lapu-Lapu Day attack, citing curiosity at the primary motive. 71 instances of unlawful access were logged. Several employees were suspended or terminated. The report calls snooping illegal, unethical, and an egregious invasion of privacy. The Privacy Commissioner's office said its investigation found the breaches violated the Freedom of Information and Protection of Privacy Act, and found that individuals whose privacy was breached weren't notified without unreasonable delay. The health authorities also believed they weren't required to notify affected individuals. The investigation also found the health authorities had reasonable safeguards in place to prevent and respond to breaches, and they took steps after realizing patients' privacy was at risk, including investigations and disciplinary action. In another matter, the BC Court of Appeal has dismissed Clearview AI's challenge to provincial privacy findings, ruling that the U.S. facial recognition company is subject to Canadian law when scraping images of BC residents, even if it operates outside the country. BC's Privacy Commissioner ordered the company to stop offering its facial recognition services in 2021 and delete the information because it used images collected from residents without their consent. The company filed a judicial review in BC Supreme Court, but the judge rejected its claim that provincial laws didn't apply to Clearview, finding that its collection of online facial data from people in BC, quote, constitutes a real and substantial connection between it and the province, end quote. And in Ontario, the Divisional Court has reserved its decision in a case testing the limits of in-camera confidentiality. A school board trustee argues she was improperly sanctioned for sharing closed session materials with the Minister of Education. The trustee argues that the sanctions should be paused because they may exceed the board's legal authority and were imposed through a flawed process. The trustee also alleges breaches of procedural fairness, including, she says, a denial of the opportunity to meaningfully respond before sanctions were imposed. The case may clarify how far elected officials can go in disclosing confidential deliberations in the name of whistleblowing. Shifting to the United States, Ghislaine Maxwell is fighting the release of tens of thousands of Epstein-related court documents, arguing a new congressional disclosure law violates separation of powers principles, making it unconstitutional. Maxwell's attorneys said the documents include transcripts of over 30 depositions and private information regarding financial and sexual matters related to Maxwell and others. During the release of the files, some victims have complained that their names and personal information were revealed in documents, while the names of their abusers were blacked out. Meanwhile, newly released records reveal a U.S. citizen was fatally shot by a federal immigration agent during a traffic stop last year, a shooting that went undisclosed by Homeland Security for nearly 11 months. The records are a portion of heavily redacted internal documents from Immigration and Customs Enforcement that American Oversight, a nonprofit, obtained as part of a Freedom of Information Act lawsuit. The department did not respond to questions about why it had made no media release or other public notification of the officer-involved shooting over the last 11 months. The only eyewitness later died in a car crash when he drove into a curved highway exit at a high rate of speed before losing control and slamming into a utility pole. The case is now under investigation. A federal judge is weighing whether to order the return of devices seized from a Washington Post reporter's home in a leak investigation, raising serious First Amendment concerns. The Post says much of the seized material is exempt from government review under the Privacy Protection Act because the reporter isn't a target of the investigation. When they searched the reporter's house, federal agents seized a phone, 2 laptops, a recorder, a portable hard drive, and a Garmin smartwatch. The newspaper's attorneys accused authorities of violating legal safeguards for journalists and trampling on the reporter's First Amendment free speech rights. And congressional testimony from a former ICE training official alleges deportation officer training programs are deficient and broken as immigration enforcement ramps up nationwide. The whistleblower accused the department of dismantling the training program for new deportation officers and lying about what they were doing. A Democratic senator's office also released dozens of pages of documents related to the training of new deportation officers, noting the disclosure came from whistleblowers. Across these cases, questions of secrecy, force, and press freedom remain at the forefront. Internationally, Russia has opened a criminal investigation against Telegram founder Pavel Durov, accusing him of aiding terrorism as authorities continue tightening digital controls and promoting state-aligned platforms with surveillance access. The investigation comes 2 weeks after Russia's communications watchdog said it was restricting the Telegram app, accusing the company of refusing to abide by Russian law. Russia actively promotes the national messaging app known as Max, which critics say could be used for surveillance. Discord has postponed its global age verification rollout after backlash over biometric data and ID collection, promising greater transparency about how it determines user ages. Discord says the global expansion of age verification will only come after it makes changes to the initial policy the company laid out in early February. The company announced it would roll out an age verification policy in March that would include face scanning or requests for an ID upload for users it could not determine if they were adults. Aid organizations have petitioned Israel's Supreme Court to block new registration rules that require detailed staff and funding disclosures, warning the measures could collapse humanitarian operations in Gaza. The measure requires aid groups to register the names and contact information of employees and to provide details about their funding and operations. The aid groups have appealed for an urgent interim order that would halt the process until a final ruling. Kogat, the Israeli military body overseeing civilian affairs in Gaza, said more than 20 organizations will continue to operate after complying with the new regulations. And Samsung's new Galaxy S26 introduces an optional privacy display mode designed to prevent shoulder surfing, a reminder that device-level privacy tools are evolving, even as systemic governance lags behind. When the privacy protection option is turned on, the pixels on the Ultra change in a way that enables the screen display to only be seen when looking directly down at it. The controls can also be set up so specific apps, such as those dealing with financial information or other sensitive information, will always open in the privacy display mode. As always, we hope today's stories help you stay informed about the forces shaping privacy, transparency, and accountability. To support this work, please subscribe through FIBA News Monitoring or consider making a donation. Our writer is Sean Fisk. Music is by the mysterious Breakmaster Cylinder. I'm Patrick Farnsworth. Thank you for listening. Stay safe and stay informed.